Hey everybody, just one more note. We're going to wait just a few seconds longer to let everybody get into the Zoom here and make sure that we're up and running on our various social platforms, and we will begin in just a moment. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, this is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have you with us here for our ongoing virtual author event series, which we have been doing for many, many months. And it's been a really wonderful way to stay connected with all of you, to meet new people, and also tonight to connect with people we've known for some time and kind of have a way to still highlight people in our community as well when we're not quite ready to get back in person. But we are going to be doing some in-person things this summer. I'm really excited to let you know that. So I'd say keep an eye out for some announcements about a little bit of an easing back into some of those things. We're going to try some outdoor programs and some other things that are, safe, and but also a way to get you guys back into a single space. Because while it's been great having these virtual programs and staying connected with you, I think we really have missed that connection where you're in a room and you're laughing together, or you're crying together, or whatever we're doing together is not quite the same on this, even though this is a really wonderful tool. And I'm glad that if we had to have a pandemic, I'm glad it happened in the age of Zoom, and not, 15 years ago, I guess, where we'd just be staring at a wall or something, or a Palm Pilot, or who knows what. But really excited to have you with us. I want to tell you about a couple of things. As you'll know, tonight we'll be talking about some of the issues around the centennial of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. We've been doing a lot of programming around that for the past year, actually, leading up to this weekend, and have several things through this weekend, and also some things after that. I won't go through the full list, but I would encourage you to go to our website, magiccitybooks.com. We'll put a link here in the chat so you can see that. Of note, I will mention one thing. We've teamed up with Dr. Tiffany Crutcher and the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest, which is happening this weekend. And we're going to be doing kind of a closing event on Sunday on the lawn at OSU Tulsa, on 700 North Greenwood, where we're bringing in Damon Lindelof, the creator of HBO's show Watchmen, and Cord Jefferson, who wrote the episode that won the Emmy, which I think was the best episode of the season. And they're going to be here in person. That'll be an actual human being in-person event. We're going to talk to them. We're going to have one of the descendants from the massacre speaking as well, talking about some of those things. And we're going to watch the episode that Cord Jefferson wrote. So I will say it's not particularly for young people. It's not a kids program. So just be aware there will be some mature elements in the program. But that's going to be at 7 o'clock on the lawn at OSU Tulsa this Sunday, the 30th, free and open to everybody. So pay attention to that. And also check the full schedule. It's a really amazing lineup of things happening through the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest. Ours is just one of many, many things happening there. Tonight, we're going to be talking with our friend Carlos Moreno. It's kind of one of those things where I don't know how long I've known Carlos, because it feels like I've known him forever. I know Carlos has been coming to our programs that we've been doing for many, many years, and was an early supporter of Booksmart Tulsa when we were starting that years and years ago. And I was always happy to see Carlos. If you don't know Carlos, Carlos is a graphic designer, works for Cap Tulsa. He's super involved with a lot of different nonprofits. For example, the Urban Coder Guild, works with, we don't want to go through the whole list, but when I think about someone like Carlos, and we're going to talk about this wonderful book and project, a much larger project, The Victory of Greenwood, tonight, I think about the one word that comes to mind is service. Carlos is someone who I've always been so impressed with, and somewhat envious of how he's been able to really devote his life to service, and I mean that in the broadest possible sense. He really spends time giving back to the community, putting in the hours, those thankless hours. There's words like sweat equity. You hear things like that a lot, and if you certainly could get paid for that stuff, he would be, Warren Buffett level rich for all of the effort that he's put into this community. And so much of it, obviously, we've seen and know about, but there's so much that has gone unseen to do all the kind of the grind that it takes to make gradual incremental change in our community. And I think that's something to be commended. And I want to welcome Carlos to our program tonight and just say, thank you for all the work that you've done and to continue to do in Tulsa.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for those kind words. Appreciate it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on. As you mentioned, I've been a longtime fan. So it's interesting to be on the other side of things, right?
Yeah, it's weird, right? It's like your long journey to the chair, the editor
Right.
chair. Well, congratulations on the book. We were just talking. You're on to this new printing. That first run is gone. This book has been flying off the shelf. So congrats on that. But I would like to begin with kind of the 50,000-foot question, which is obviously we're talking about the Victory of Greenwood, the book version of that. But the Victory of Greenwood is a much larger project, and the book is kind of the end result or part of the work that you've done through that. So tell us what the project is and how it even came to be.
Yeah, it's definitely been a long journey. I when I first moved to Tulsa, as you know, I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. Moved here in 1998, and all those years ago, as a young Latino graphic designer, just kind of trying to make his way, and get my first clients and be that young entrepreneur. It was really the Greenwood community that gave me my first shot. That opened their doors to me when nobody else in Tulsa would. All of my first clients were all on Greenwood, from the Greenwood Cultural Center to the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce, the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame, the Mabel Little House, the Oklahoma Eagle. I spent a ton of time freelancing for the Oklahoma Eagle, and really got to know not just the Goodwin family, but sort of everybody that would pass through the offices of the Oklahoma Eagle, the successor to the Tulsa Star, the oldest Black newspaper in Oklahoma, and the first Black daily newspaper in the country. So to just be, um, in those walls with that family that had such a legacy, and learning from all the elders about the history of Greenwood, not just about the massacre, not just about these 24 hours, but the full history of Greenwood from its origins all the way up until, the modern era, and just learning about all of the key historic figures that played a part in Tulsa's history, but in the country's history as well. And just that story just never left me. For 20 years, I've collected books, articles, photographs, anything and everything that you could possibly think of about Greenwood. If there's a book about Greenwood, I probably have it. And so for the last 2 years, it was really a question of, what do I do with all this information? What do I do with all these stories? What do I do with all this stuff I've collected? And it was actually Ann Patton who kind of, pushed me over the edge and convinced me that the conversation started. I wanted her to write the book because a few years previous to that, she had written a book about the origins of, the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana, in her book Unmasked. And so after working on her with her on that project, I was like, what if you did something about Greenwood? And the conversation sort of shifted. And she said, well, you need to write the book about Greenwood. I'm like, well, I can't write a book. I don't know how to write a book. I don't know what I would do. And so it took a little bit of convincing, but finally, after talking with, going back to the Eagle and talking with them and talking with a lot of Greenwood, people who are still deeply involved in the Greenwood community, the folks at the Greenwood Cultural Center and others, I felt like, yeah, I can do this. And I didn't really sort of find the voice of the book until I read Shamari Will's Black Fortunes. I don't know if you've read that, but just the way he told the story of the people in that book, it's about the first Black people who achieved the status of being a millionaire after Reconstruction. And O.W. Gurley is one of the people that he profiles in the book. But to take that sort of biographical approach and have each chapter of the book be a sort of a profile of a different person. Once I saw that format, I was like, okay, graphic designers steal, so I'm going to steal this, and I'm going to use it to. So it began. So the project began as a series of articles in the Tulsa Star, Tamantha Norman's paper, and it just sort of blossomed from there. As you mentioned, the book is out. Our published date is June 2nd. And we're planning a couple of museum exhibits, one at AHA, the other at Greenwood Gallery. And we're planning a podcast with Jesse Ulrich over at Pod for Good, a video series. So we'll just kind of see, where this all takes us.
And one of the things that I've so appreciated about the project is that, one of the things, it may not be a surprise to people listening, but I think, I meet so many people from out of town, and they really, over the last year and a half, really have come to know this for the first time. It's not a surprise that all the news that's kind of generated, especially like after the, certain television shows and all the things, it's the national profile of the massacre has really risen over the last 18 months or so. So I'm hearing people asking questions, that, they want to know more about it. And as you know, there's a huge amount of misinformation about what happened to Greenwood after the massacre, right? And this is a story about resilience, and it's a story about, one day did not kill Greenwood. It did not destroy it. It certainly, had an indelible mark on it. But when you look at those images of Greenwood in say by the late 1930s into the 40s, you would never guess by seeing those images that this community had gone through what it had gone through. I remember going, even like as a kid, to there was a jazz festival down on Greenwood in the 80s and 90s. And, it was never mentioned even, no one would even bring up what had happened there. And so anyway, obviously urban renewal and some of those things play a huge role in that second wave that really kind of changed things more permanently. And you mentioned Black Fortunes, which does the exact same thing, how did you kind of decide on that angle, where there's a lot of heavy stuff right now. There's a lot of books coming out about this. And I think to some people have even voiced to me, they can't handle kind of the re-traumatization of reading about this over and over and over again. This book is not that, was that part of what you wanted to do, to kind of tell a different story and not just tell the story of the massacre?
That was definitely a part of it. As I mentioned, I collected anything and everything I could about Greenwood. So, I read Alfred Brophy and Scott Ellsworth and Tim Madigan and Randy Crable. Most of the books that are on the bookshelf are about these 24 hours. And, I was looking back and just thinking to myself, if I had written just another book about the massacre with, a black and white picture of destroyed Greenwood on the cover, as is every, almost every book has just about the same cover on it. That's not really the Greenwood that I was taught. It's not the Greenwood that the elders spoke about when they talked to me about it. And here I'm speaking about people like former State Representative Don Ross, who founded the Race Massacre Commission, Maxine Horner, Jim Goodwin, Eddie Fay Gates, just all the people who were around back then. And you gotta remember, 20 years ago, or a little over 20 years ago, a lot of the survivors were still around. Today there are only 3 left. But this was a time when, especially when the 2001 report first came out, there was a lot of buzz around Greenwood, and the elders were very eager at that time to talk not just about the massacre, but about the full scope of Greenwood's history, how it was formed, how Greenwood was able to build its wealth in the first place. And to your point, what happened afterwards. There's 100 years of history that I think as a city we have this sort of cultural narrative that history in North Tulsa ends on June 1st of 1921, not realizing that there's this whole story that happens in Greenwood's rebuilding. So right at June 2nd, you have the Red Cross arriving and setting up their relief headquarters on the campus of Booker T. Washington, which were the only 4 buildings that weren't burned down. And Maurice Willows writes his report in December of 1921. But you have all this activity and regrowth and rebuilding. Lula Williams reopened her movie theater. And I found that newspaper article. It was from September 14th of 1922 in the Black Dispatch. So just going through all the newspaper articles and kind of learning more about how Greenwood was rebuilt. There's video footage, 16 millimeter print film footage of Greenwood from 1925 to 1928. And just like you said, you would never, here it's just 4 years after the massacre. You'd never guess that anything happened. It's a thriving, bustling neighborhood with all these amazing shops, and it's this pedestrian neighborhood where everyone's living, their life in the street. So there's just this amazing amount of street life. There's amazing amount of businesses and movie theaters and all that type of stuff. Just 4 short years after this disaster. And I certainly wanted to, and especially in the earlier chapters of the book, I do talk about people's lives and what they went through during the massacre itself. But I talk a lot about what happened to them afterwards. So, A.J. Smitherman, who started the Tulsa Star, went on to become one of the most prominent African-American journalists in the country of his generation. Olivia Hooker went on to not only become the first Black woman to serve on the U.S. Coast Guard, but did groundbreaking academic work for children with Down syndrome. So here you have this community of people that went through this trauma, but then went on and just became such amazing and influential human beings. And I wanted to take that sort of more biographical approach so that people, I hope, could connect with Greenwood the way I connected with Greenwood, people's own individual stories and these family stories and this oral history, which to me was a different way of telling the story than just a straight up history book or an academic style book.
So you mentioned the book is told in kind of these vignettes where we introduce the different people. What was the first one? What was your entry point? Who did you write about first?
It was Smitherman, who I wrote about first. Again, his legacy with the Tulsa Star, and I had not known this until I really dove into the research. But he had actually started a newspaper before the Tulsa Star with a business partner, W.H. Twine in Muskogee, called the Muskogee Scimitar. And it was in the Muskogee Scimitar that the guardianship racket was sort of revealed. And it features prominently in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Can you explain for people that don't understand what that was? Not everybody knows what it is.
They Smitherman and Twine were both, and you see this a lot, Black journalists who are also attorneys. In fact, I spoke with Jim Goodwin about this, who is also an attorney and a journalist, the publisher of the Oklahoma Eagle. So W.H. Twine and A.J. Smitherman, who are working for the Muskogee, who own the Muskogee Scimitar, they uncover this racket. And the way it works is somebody would basically say, you know, this family, referring to either a native family or a black freedman family, would say, you know, the mother is you know, not fit to take care of her children, or the father is not fit to take care of their children. So they would go to a judge and appeal and say, since this parent is not um, uh, a not a suitable guardian for these children, then I am going to become the guardian of the children. And judges would really play fast and loose with this, and just make these approvals left and right. And so if you became the guardian of these children, you would also what came with that would be their land allotments. So when the Dawes Act and the Indian Allotment Act were passed by Grover Cleveland, in Indian territory, this is before statehood, every man, woman, and child who was registered, who's a member of the 5 civilized tribes and registered on the Dawes Roll, were granted land allotments. And so, I mean, if a family had 3 children, then it would be, you know, each the mother, the father, and all 3 children would have each of them land allotments. But this guardianship racket was basically a way for white men to steal land that belonged to Native and black freedmen citizens.
So they were reporting on that and kind of bringing the, you know, kind of corruption of that whole thing to the forefront for the first time.
Yeah.
And also, you know, had to be putting their necks on the line too. I mean, think about the who was controlling the levers of power with that guardianship stuff, right?
Absolutely. So it was this sort of really incredibly brave um, uh, journalism work that they were doing. And Smitherman was never afraid to report on things like lynchings. He would write letters to the governor and say, you know, there's about to be a lynching and you have to stop this. So he was never afraid to sort of stick his neck out when it came to issues like that. So just, you know, hearing about his story and just the sheer amount of bravery that he had. I mean, he could have been himself lynched at any point in time. Yeah. But you know, he's just this fearless spokesperson for civil rights, really. Yeah. He protested a 1916 housing ordinance that passed in Tulsa. And again, you know, he could have been jailed or shot or, you know, who knows what for protesting that. And here's a housing ordinance that wasn't repealed until 1963.
You know, the role of newspaper men and people in that world obviously is a big part of the story of all of this. And even today, as you mentioned, Jim Goodwin and some of the people. But the book itself is published through All Souls, and you guys kind of named an imprint for Jenkins Lloyd Jones, right? And Jenkins Lloyd Jones, you want to explain who he is and his relationship to this whole thing?
Yeah, so this is kind of a poetic justice, if you will. So when I had put a couple of these articles together and had partnered with Meg Sutherland to really, you know, go at it full bore and you know, commit to writing the book, we went to All Souls and you know, wanted to talk to Marlon Lavenhar, the senior minister there, about Richard Lloyd Jones's legacy. Richard Lloyd Jones is the founder of both. Well, he wasn't the founder of the Tulsa Tribune. He had purchased it from Charles Page in, I think, 1913 thereabouts. But he was the owner editor of the Tulsa Tribune, and he founded All Souls Church, All Souls Unitarian Church. So here's a man who, you know, has a very, and I to this day I still cannot wrap my head around it. Here's, you know, the most progressive liberal Unitarian church probably in the country, and at the same time quite likely the most racist newspaper that Tulsa's ever had in its history. And that's putting it mildly. I mean, they are the authors of the editorial,
This is the
Negro
Nav
for
Negro. Yeah,
attacking girl in an elevator,
yeah,
that sparks the fight in front of the courthouse, which isn't the sole reason for the attack on Greenwood. Several aspects of it had been planned as a way to steal Greenwood's land and move Tulsa's black community further to the north. But Richard Lloyd Jones is just this incredibly complex and contradictory um, person in Tulsa's history. And so we went to the church and we had a couple of very long conversations with Marlon Lavenhar, and in those conversations, it came about that the family had actually left an endowment at All Souls for book publishing. And so Pastor Lavenhar kind of came up with the idea and came back to us and said, why don't we use some of this money to help with the research and the publishing of the book? And so we had to kind of take that back and think about it, and do we really want to do this? But we really thought, this is a way to take this family legacy and really kind of turn it around, for all of the things that Richard Lloyd Jones and then later even his son, when he ran the Tulsa Tribune, all of the just outright racist things that they published, to publish something that is a counter narrative, right? Here are the great things that came out of Greenwood. Here's the lasting legacy that Greenwood left, not just on the city, but on the entire country. To us, felt like the right partnership and the right thing to do. And there's even some talk now at the church to continue that work and continue telling positive stories about Greenwood through its people, through its culture, through its just everything, anything and everything that had to do with Greenwood. Are there ways that we can tell those stories in a positive light through the church?
yeah. When I saw that you guys had done that, it really kind of put a little smirk on my face because it's such a kind of a Robin Hood kind of move where you guys, because it's a problematic thing. And I know, obviously, I'm good for pals with everybody at All Souls, and they've been a huge partner for us. And I think very few organizations in town, especially, very much white centric organizations, they do as much anti-racism work as anybody in town and have been committed to doing a lot of that work. And they know that that's kind of something that's just there and you have to deal with it and you can't just hide it. And I think it's a cool way to kind of do that, because I think it's a model for other organizations in town who I think, we don't get to choose. I mean, if we're 5 generations later, 3 generations later, you don't get to pick who your founder always was, but you do have to kind of address it. And I think that it's a good model for some of our legacy organizations here in town to think about how to do that. So good for you guys. Very cool. So I'm curious, we talked about Smitherman being the entry point for the book. Was there anybody that you had kind of heard about, wanted to write about, but there wasn't enough stuff out there to tell the story? Like who do we not know enough about to really talk about?
Yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot. There's California Taylor. I wish I could have written a chapter about her. Her family was from Bully, Oklahoma, which was one of the 50 all-black towns
Yeah.
in Indian Territory before statehood. They supposedly owned, and I couldn't find anything to prove this, but they supposedly owned the largest cotton gin west of the Mississippi for decades. If you're familiar with Senate Bill 1, which is sort of the first order of business for this newly formed state of Oklahoma in 1907 in Guthrie, Senate Bill 1 establishes Jim Crow laws. So it defines who is black and who is not black. And then it goes on to say that a white person riding in a train car, if there was a white person riding in a train car, that a black person couldn't ride with him. And what they would do is they would build special train cars, and they would put these train cars behind the animal cars. So you can just imagine riding in a train, and this is of course pre-air conditioning, in August in Oklahoma, behind all the animals. Not a pleasant experience, to say the least. California Taylor had a custom train car built just for herself. And she would put that train car in front of where all the white passenger train cars were. And the train companies would like say, you've got to pay thousands of dollars for this. And she would just give them cash and say, do it, just do it.
The power of the purse.
And she would,
power of the purse.
yeah, and she would take her friends to New York to go clothes shopping. So that's the story. That's the myth.
That's the urban myth.
Yeah. But I couldn't find enough sort of really grounding primary sources to be able to say like, okay, this is who she was, where she came from, and are these stories really true? Yeah. Peg Leg Taylor was another huge one. I had actually written an article about Peg Leg Taylor and then figured out I had the wrong guy. His first name wasn't Horace, it was Matthew, and so I kind of had to scrap that whole thing. And I'm still looking for the real Peg Leg Taylor.
And it makes me just realize how boring our names are now.
Yeah, there's Cowboy Long, who there's several people saying that there was nobody ever charged during the massacre. No white person was ever charged. Cowboy Long actually was charged. He wasn't charged for murder, although he is believed to be the murderer of Dr. A.C. Jackson. He was charged.
Jackson, who was the head of the hospital there, is that correct?
Yeah. Very well-known surgeon, again, nationally. The Mayo brothers, the Mayo Clinic, called him one of the most prominent surgeons in the country. Not black surgeons, just surgeons, period. So Cowboy Long was charged. He was not brought to trial or convicted, or he didn't serve any jail time or had to pay a fine or anything, but he was charged. I write about Alfalfa Bill Murray. There's a lot of colorful names in the book.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of jealous of those cool names.
Just changed your name to Cowboy Martin.
Well, hey, it's never too late, right?
Or Alfalfa Jeff Martin.
Well, my middle name's Charles, so you and I kind of have that connection already there. So,
well, there you go. Yeah.
So when you kind of, obviously, those were kind of the myths and the urban legends that you couldn't quite pin down enough to put in there as fact. And I'm sure there's a zillion of those stories because so much of this is there. Where did you, obviously you mentioned you have some connections to like the Eagle and some of the other places. Was there a primary source for research, or was it just kind of a hodgepodge of wherever you could get everything? Because there still is not a great online resource. I think that's one thing that's sitting out there, and maybe you guys will end up doing some of this work. There's not a great kind of central database, at least that I could find.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. We had to go anywhere and everywhere. We had to go to the McFarland Library, Mark Carlson's collection. We had to go to the Ruth Avery collection over at OSU Tulsa, their library. Langston had some stuff, especially the materials that were used to write Mabel Little's autobiography. We had to scour, the genealogy records over at Hardesty Library. Librarians, by the way, all out there, librarians are super awesome. During the pandemic, they were meeting us in parking lots, and telling us, I'm not supposed to give you this file folder.
It's like something out of like All the President's Men or something.
It was very cloak and dagger. It's like, I'm not supposed to be giving you this, but here it is. Yeah. We had to go to the county. We actually went back and forth between state and county, and it took us like 2 months. But finally at the county court clerk's office, we found all of BC Franklin's court case files, which had been previously, thought to have been lost forever. But we located those and several other court cases, the city court clerk's office. I mean, just, everywhere.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, obviously, you mentioned that in the late 90s, there were still a fair amount of survivors of the massacre still around, and we're down to, like you mentioned, just a handful now. Obviously, we saw the testimony, that amazing testimony last week. So in 2001, the commission report comes out. That commission had been started in the late 1990s, had taken a few years. This is the report that kind of came up with some actual stats. This is where the number 300 potential deaths first kind of is put out there. And that did cause a big stir, but I wonder, that faded fairly quickly. And I would say between, say, 2001 and, let's say, 2 or 3 even years ago, there was not a national conversation happening about this. Do you think that was because that was like a little bit too early in the internet age where it didn't catch fire? There was nothing could really go viral. The news cycle wasn't the same as it is now, because it's very difficult to think that this version of this kind of resurgence of interest is going to fade like that did, or at least I hope it won't. But you see what I'm saying? This feels different now.
Yeah, well, I certainly have that same hope, and yeah, I hope you're right. I hope this doesn't fade. I hope it continues. I hope that we'll continue to be able to write stories. I've got at least half a dozen that articles and stories that I wish I could have put in the book that there there are things like deadlines, and editors want crisp and clear guidelines and things like that, so just from the limitations. But yeah, I certainly hope this project continues. The 2001 report actually became part of a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court in 2005. And the Supreme Court just kind of refused to hear it. And I think that's where sort of the wind, sort of all went out of the sails there. And it's taken, this long for the community of Greenwood, for Demario Solomon Simmons, who's mounted, this new lawsuit, for him to kind of, gather up all his resources and create that testimony that we just saw in front of Congress, really to and I think the Watchmen and Lovecraft Country and those sort of new ways of storytelling kind of brings attention to an event in a different way that people maybe
I think that role, that role that pop culture can play, I think at its highest, is the amplification, right? It's like if that show led people to the internet and made them want to look up more about that and know more, then I think it was hugely successful, whether it was that show or anything else. And that's been I think we kind of lucked out in a way that happened like a year before this. Like if it was kind of happening right now, kind of timed with the anniversary, we wouldn't have kind of, I think, gotten that full 18 months of people trying to learn more, find out more. And I don't want to say build excitement towards you're not excited about this centennial, but a way to kind of appreciate it on a higher level,
Yeah. And, I think by the time Lovecraft Country came around, that's when it was really, okay, now there's 2 shows that are talking about this event.
Yeah.
What's this all about? And we set up our social media sort of late 2019, early 2020, and we just got flooded with questions. Did this really happen? What happened? When did it, when, just all the questions, and a lot of our, especially our Twitter feed has been, we'll see something out there that somebody will say, like, Sarah Page, accused Dick Rowland, and no, that never happened. She never pressed charges. Or, only 10 people died. Well, no, the Red Cross report in 1921 says there was about 300 deaths, and the 2001 report confirmed it. So a lot of it's been sort of breaking these narratives and myths that
you guys are out there kind of hunting for misinformation, trying to correct the record, even on a tweet by tweet basis. That's the sweat equity I was talking about, because that takes a lot of effort to kind of hunt down those things. But there is an aggregate impact to that, I think, over time. Yeah. I want to encourage people, if you're watching, if you haven't yet clicked on this link and got a copy of Victory of Greenwood, I would encourage you to do so. I bet we can even get Carlos to stop by and sign some of those for you. And it's I think a new look at something that we think we know a lot about now, but this is really that second wave. I'm curious, Carlos, and also, hey guys, if you guys have some questions for Carlos, please drop those in the Q&A and we'll get some of those out to Carlos as well. That second wave of Greenwood, that really kind of goes, I'd say, like, from the late 20s all the way until, I would say like mid 60s is where you really start to see things happening. There are a lot of people obviously who are still around from that period and know things. Have you gotten to know a lot of that generation of folks as well?
I have. I wrote a piece for the April issue of Tulsa People magazine. And I kind of took the same approach, right? I profile Bill Leidy, who is a real estate agent here in Tulsa, and Deborah Hunter, who's a local poet. And I think you may have even had her on.
Yeah, Deborah's great. I've known her for a long time. She's great.
Yeah. So here's a white family that lived in Greenwood and a black family that lived in Greenwood, and I sort of talk about this mid 1960s era of Greenwood and how it's in the middle of this sort of cultural shift that Tulsa starts to experience. Lortondale was built in the late 50s. You've got the 1957 Tulsa Comprehensive Plan that designs the interdispersal loop, the IDL, the 4 highways that encircle downtown. So you have this cultural shift from a very dense pedestrian type of lifestyle, and everything centered around downtown, to and it's mostly white America and white Tulsa that moves out into the suburbs, that moves out to places like Heller Park and like Lortondale. So you have to have these highways to get, businessmen and women in and out of the downtown area as quickly as possible. Yeah. And so you have this car culture that arises, and Greenwood sort of becomes a victim of this change, from being a very pedestrian-centered city to being a very car culture type of city. The longest stretch of Route 66 runs through Oklahoma.
And I do think it's also important to say, of course, what there is white flight, but the urban sprawl that killed downtown, the whole of downtown. I mean, this was part of that. I mean, absolutely. Downtown Tulsa in the 60s, 70s, 80s was just a constant. It was on a decline. So it wasn't as if like the rest of downtown was also doing great, but it was I think the lack of attention in some ways, that kind of soft bigotry of low expectations that kind of, said the general idea to me is like, we're okay if this goes away. That seemed like the kind of sentiment from the powers that be, at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see where Greenwood owns, land and businesses and monetary wealth. What they don't have is political power. Right. So during this era, there's a proposal to build a highway down Riverside, right through Maple Ridge. And so, obviously Maple Ridge wasn't going to have that. So they fought and they went to city council, and it did take them, almost 2 decades to fight building a highway through Maple Ridge down, widening Riverside. And we wouldn't have river parks, today if that fight was not successful. So it's certainly a great thing that they were able to combat that. But Greenwood politically didn't have that sort of strength or representation.
No one was advocating for them. Yeah.
Exactly. And those who were, people like Mabel Little or Homer Johnson, and Curtis Lawson, leaders in Greenwood, just, nobody was listening to them.
Right.
Their voice did not carry as much weight. You got to remember, of the 40 mayors that Tulsa has had, 39 of them have come from Maple Ridge. So you've got this, ingrained power structure in Tulsa.
Say that one more time. I'm not sure I quite got that.
Of the 40 mayors that Tulsa has had, 39 of them have been from Maple Ridge.
Wow. That's a mind blower. I'd not heard that before. Yeah. So I've had some great conversations with some people over the years, kind of about that mid-century Greenwood period. A good buddy of mine, we were talking about news people. A good buddy of mine is a guy named Gary Lee, who was from Tulsa here, and he was the Moscow bureau chief for the Washington Post for years. Went to Booker T, grew up in Tulsa. His cousin is Anita Hill, and so he tells me about hanging out in Greenwood, walking around as kids with Anita Hill down in Greenwood, going to the movies and going to having all kinds of fun. And it was so counter to what, even though I learned of the massacre late in life because it was not taught in school, I certainly hadn't thought about kind of this vibrancy of culture and life happening like even a couple decades before I was born, because it seems so far removed. It's been pretty powerful. And so I really appreciate kind of what you with this book shining a light on that. We do have a question here from Karen, who's one of our viewers, who says, do you have a favorite story from the book? Obviously, you cover lots of different individuals and families, but is there something that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, one of the last chapters. And when I discovered this, it really just blew my mind. The story of Emmett J Mchenry. You've probably never heard of Emmett J Mchenry. I'm sure that very few of your viewers have probably ever heard this name. But he belongs in the same sentence as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and Tim Berners-Lee and any other internet history name that you can throw out there. He grew up in Greenwood, graduated Booker T, went on to work for IBM, and then founded Network Solutions. So if you ever registered a domain name in the 90s, you had to register it from Network Solutions, and that was Emmett J Mchenry. Not only did he found this company, which was at the time the exclusive registrar for domain names, but he invented the entire system of domain name registration and then how that domain name then gets propagated to all the other servers out there, right? So when you type in, the Victory of Greenwood.com, that domain name has a server that it sits on. And so all the other servers all around the world have to know where it is, right? So he creates this sort of infrastructure that allowed the commercial internet to exist. He takes this technology over here and that technology over there and puts them together, and won out a contract from the engineers at Stanford, and really becomes responsible for the creation of the commercial internet. And so the question becomes, why don't we say Emmett J Mchenry in the same sentence as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates?
Yeah, where's the school? Where's the school for that guy?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had the great opportunity to talk with Mr. Mchenry over the phone, and it was just, being a technology person myself, we kind of geeked out for about an hour.
Yeah, I was about to say, you kind of revealed your geek bias with that pick, I think. But
absolutely.
But I think that's just one that's representative, though, of all the people that you introduce us to here. And like I said, I think we may know the Mount Rushmore of names at this point, but you go so far into so many amazing people. So I want to encourage everybody to get a copy of Victory of Greenwood. It's just it's a true pleasure to kind of spend time with the people that Carlos profiles here. And I'm hoping that this will be a kind of part one of I think there's so many stories. I don't want to put pressure on you, but hopefully we'll see more of these on the road from the Jink and Lloyd Jones Press. And Carlos, it's been just a blast. Thank you so much for taking some time. And I hope to see you in person, not on a screen soon.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Looking forward to it, Jeff.
All right. Hey, everybody watching. Yeah, everybody watching, take care of yourself. Please go to as much as you can this weekend. Support the Black Wall Street Legacy Fest, the Rise and Remember. If you got tickets, go to all that stuff and show support for everybody down there. See you guys very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.